good to be able to sing together, even if we can't hear each other. I want to share with you for the scripture lesson this morning, Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. Starting in verse 1, Matthew writes, "After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, 'Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going on ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you.' So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. And suddenly Jesus met them and said, 'Greetings.' And they came to him and took hold of his feet and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, 'Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me.'" Well, it is Sunday morning for us and for the disciples. The women have gone to the tomb, and no matter how much the disciples might wish it were different, in their world everything was still the same. And yet, everything had changed. They had lost Jesus. They felt isolated, afraid, and alone. It was a time when nothing seemed normal and everything was betwixt and between. It was the third day of their quarantine experience. They continued to gather in the same room, in the same place where they had last feasted together. But now, no one sat in the rabbi's seat. Jesus' chair was empty. The good smells of bread and roasted lamb had faded to dust, and dust sparkled in the early morning sunlight as each of them reflected on the scripture. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Everything had changed, but everything was still the same as yesterday and the day before and the day before that. They didn't know what to do. They were leaderless, adrift. Early in the week, they had been planning a revolution. Their country was going to be free. The yoke of oppression was going to be lifted. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the new king of Israel. But here it was, 8 days after that triumphal entry, and everything was still the same. Rome was still in charge. The soldiers still lined the streets and demanded Roman law be followed. Pilate was still upon his prelate's throne, and Herod was still calling himself the king of the Jews. Israel was still a client state of Rome, a conquered country, and they were still just a rough, ragtag group of Galileans hiding in an upper room, hoping to escape the notice of the authorities. Everything was the same. And then the women returned from their sad and solemn duty to tend Jesus' body, and in an instant everything changed. They reported what had happened at the tomb. The angel had rolled the stone away. The angel had told them Jesus had risen and was no longer in the tomb. And they had seen it was so. The angel told them to come here to the disciples and tell them this good news, this wonderful news. And on the way home, they saw Jesus. He was alive. This changed everything. Everything was changed on that first Easter morning. Death was no longer the end of the story. It was just a new beginning. Jesus was not dead, but alive. Everything changed, even though everything stayed the same. This Easter is different for us here in 2020. Everything seems to have changed. We aren't meeting in our beautiful sanctuaries. There are no flowers on the altar or lilies in the narthex. We cannot greet one another with hugs and handshakes. Everything has changed. I'm sitting here in my office in Pulaski, and you are each in your own living rooms or bedrooms, in your own homes. We are in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, and we may be as scared as the disciples were that first Easter. Scared for our lives and the lives of our loved ones, scared for our jobs, scared for our families and what the future might bring. In fact, I bet we are closer in emotions and attitude to where the disciples were on that first Easter than any other Easter we have lived. They were experiencing these same fears. They feared it was only a matter of time before the authorities caught up with them and they were killed, just like Jesus. They were scared that they would never see their families again, that they no longer had a job or a purpose or a meaning in their lives. I bet they felt much like we are feeling. What are we going to do? What is going to happen to us? What does the future hold? The disciples asked these questions, and we are asking these questions. Everything in our lives has changed. So, do we give in to despair? Or are we like the disciples, ready to hear the message of the women? Are you ready? Here it goes. Guess what? Everything is the same as the first Easter. Jesus is alive. Jesus is not dead. He is risen. He has left the tomb, left behind the grave, left behind the dust of fear and death. This is the good news of that first Easter and the good news of this Easter, the good news of every Easter. Everything is the same. God is still in control. God is still in heaven. And Jesus is at God's right hand, pouring down God's blessed grace and mercy upon us all, upon any who would receive it. Because nothing can separate us from the love of God through the risen Christ. Not death, not life, not even the coronavirus. Doesn't that truth just want to make you shout, to sing, to dance? Can't you see the disciples in that upper room on that first Easter morning, breaking into cheers, breaking into song? Can you see Peter grabbing Mary Magdalene and spinning her across the room in an impromptu dance? Take comfort, my friends. Even though everything has changed, everything is still the same. I'd like to end with a poem from Christy Bother with a nod to Dr. Seuss. This is how the virus stole Easter. 'Twas late in 19 when the virus began, bringing chaos and fear to all people, each land. People were sick, hospitals full, doctors overwhelmed, no one in school. As winter gave way to the promise of spring, the virus raged on, touching peasant and king. People hid in their homes from the enemy unseen. They YouTubed and Zoomed, social distance and cleaned. April approached and churches were closed. There won't be an Easter, the world supposed. There won't be church services and egg hunts are out. No reason for new dresses when we can't go about. Holy Week started as bleak as the rest. The world was focused on masks and on tests. Easter can't happen this year, it proclaimed online, and at home it just won't be the same. Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, the days came and went. The virus pressed on. It just would not relent. The world woke on Sunday, and nothing had changed. The virus still menaced, the people estranged. Pooh-pooh to the saints, the world was grumbling. They're finding out now that no Easter is coming. They're just waking up. We'll know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open a minute or two. Then all the saints will all cry, boo-hoo. That noise said the world will be something to hear. So it paused, and the world put a hand to its ear. And it did hear a sound coming through all the skies. It started down low, and it started to rise. But the sound wasn't depressed. Why, this sounded triumphant. It couldn't be so, but it grew with abundance. The world stared around, popping its eyes. Then it shook. What it saw was a shocking surprise. Every saint in the nation, the tall and the small, was celebrating Jesus in spite of it all. It hadn't stopped Easter from coming, it came. Somehow or another it came, just the same. And the world with its life quite stuck in quarantine stood puzzling and puzzling. Just how can it be? It came without bonnets, it came without bunnies, it came without egg hunts, cantatas, or money. Then the world thought of something it hadn't before. Maybe Easter, it thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Easter perhaps means a little bit more. And what happened then? Well, the story's not done. What will you do? Will you share with that one or two people needing hope in this night? Will you share the source of your life in this fight? The churches are empty, but so is the tomb. Jesus is victor over death, doom, and gloom. So this year at Easter, let this be our prayer. As the virus still rages all around, everywhere, may the world see hope when it looks at God's people. May the world see the church is not a building or steeple. May the world find faith in Jesus' death and resurrection. May the world find joy in a time of dejection. May 2020 be known as the year of survival. But not only that, let it start a revival. Would you join me in singing, He Lives? Ron?